The 1999 cult thriller Fight Club introduces the viewer to a man so objectified by the society he inhabits that he is never even given a name within the film. This man, played by Edward Norton and credited only as narrator, feels as though his presence has been reduced to a cog in the capitalist engine, rather than a subject in mediation with morality or truth. The narrator meets a charismatic soap salesman named Tyler Durden, played by Brad Pitt, and the two office workers form a bare-knuckled boxing group that gradually evolves into an anarchist militia. He also begins a relationship with a cynical, impoverished woman named Marla Singer, played by Helena Bonham Carter. The discontent displayed by the three characters echoes the philosophy of Alain Badiou, who asserts that people living in the late 20th and early 21st centuries inhabit a culture where monetary gain and material consumption are the primary objectives of all discourse and knowledge systems, and that notions of good and evil have been made redundant. In his book, Ethics, an Essay on the Understanding of Evil, Badiou identifies four philosophical spheres through which truth can be realized by the subject. These are politics, art, love, and science. He recognizes each of these spheres as a fully independent truth procedure and relates them to the event, which he interprets as a point in which our established knowledge systems are ruptured by a particular truth. Badiou argues that while this truth, indeed all truth, is absolute, it consistently evades our perception, except in the case of an event, at which point the truth becomes momentarily discernible. Like Jacques Lacan and Martin Heidegger before him, Badiou distinguishes truth from knowledge, interpreting the latter as being composed solely of language and bodies. Conversely, truth exists independently and is apprehended during specific and transcendent moments when a barrier is somehow breached, and that breach is recognized, remembered, and remained faithful to by the subject. Notably, Badiou does not consider subjectivity an inherent human trait, but rather a state that the individual becomes by remaining faithful to the witnessed event, and by introducing the truth into worldly situations and discourse. Indeed, he suggests that, to quote philosopher Adrian Johnston, there are as many subjects as there are truths. To reiterate, the event does not and will not make sense according to the present social system or, quote, rules of existence, and thus it will be up to the individual to introduce and mediate their experiences into established language and knowledge. Badiou regards the act of denying or ignoring the event as a form of evil. In Fight Club, the narrator expresses aspects of Badiou's worldview, even before the defining event occurs. With sardonic humor, he tells the viewer that, quote, when deep space exploration ramps up, it'll be the corporations that name everything. The IBM Stellarsphere, the Microsoft Galaxy, Planet Starbucks, end quote. Despite a lavishly furnished apartment and comfortable, financially secure job, he feels a constant sense of emotional detachment and psychological unease. Plagued by bouts of insomnia, the narrator dazedly observes that in his life, quote, nothing feels real. Everything's far away. Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy, end quote. This line is cleverly juxtaposed over a shot of the narrator watching infomercials in the dead of night, and then watching an office printer spit out reams of paper in the harsh fluorescent light of day. It hints at the simulatory nature of contemporary or postmodern society, as described by psychoanalyst John Graham, a system of symbols and knowledge so far removed and isolated from reality that we are unaware of external truths or how to access them. Like Badiou, Fight Club postulates that capitalist society is structured in a way that we cannot question its parameters, that we have been conditioned to conform to a meta-narrative that laboring and consuming will bring us emotional fulfillment. But it won't, declares a character in the film. Quote, and we're slowly learning that, and we're very, very pissed off, End quote. Badiou argues that the contemporary understanding of ethics is one of the ways in which the real power relations in society are concealed. He concurs with philosopher Quentin Melissu that humanitarian intervention is used primarily as a justification for ensuring economic and imperial interests are maintained. Moreover, current political discourse relates the concept of good and evil to violence and the prevention of violence, with ethical procedures serving merely as a means of harm minimization, rather than as a potential mediation of truth. Badiou dislikes this conception of ethics, or human rights as humanitarian advocates call it, because it reduces human experiences to animalistic behavior. Thought of in purely biological terms, the human is certainly the, quote, most wily of animals, the most patient, the most obstinately dedicated to the cruel desires of his own heart, end quote. However, this interpretation of human beings is, quote, beneath the paradigm of good and evil, end quote. The same way that a wolf who kills and eats a baby lamb is beneath and outside the lingual definition of evil. Rather, evil exists, quote, only to the extent of the human subject, not the human animal, end quote. Badiou identifies three dimensions of evil, all of which relate to the processing of truth by the subject. These are the plenitude of evil, denial of the event, and the totalizing of the event. Badiou's other major problem with contemporary ethics is that it positions people as victims either of their circumstances or, more insidiously, of their own nature. This representation is applied most obviously to third world or indigenous peoples who are routinely depicted by politicians and the media as a form of, quote, starving, diseased, and abused subhuman, end quote, that must be pitied and saved, usually through humanitarian intervention. The narrator in Fight Club condones this postmodern system of ethics in the early stages of the film. He frequents various support groups for illnesses that he does not actually have. He finds the experiences cathartic, perhaps because he can glimpse something emotionally and psychologically raw in the other attendees, whose experiences provide a stark contrast to the simulacra of his home and work life. His insomnia is broken for a short time, but eventually returns once he encounters another faker, Marla, who reflects his own falsehood. While the film is sympathetic towards the members of these support groups, it does somewhat condemn them for what Omar Lizardo calls, quote, assuming the role of a victim, end quote, with the following lines. Tyler, this is your pain. This is your burning hand. It's right here. Look at it. Narrator, I'm going to my cave. I'm going to my cave and I'm going to find my power animal. Tyler, no, don't deal with this the way those dead people do. In this scene, Tyler concurs with Badiou that to pity someone or to invoke self-pity is to disempower the human subject, robbing them of agency and self-determination. According to psychologist Renee D. Lockwood, the experience of violence and pain should not be denied or displaced, the way the support groups instruct, but dealt with head-on and in the moment. For it is in that moment of rupture, according to Badiou, that the truth can be glimpsed. In the introduction to Ethics, Peter Hallwood writes that, rather than reducing discourse to an act of pity for victims, ethics should focus on reasserting subjectivity and becoming, quote, the enduring maxim of singular processes, rather than serving as the, quote, conservative good conscience. Ethics should concern, quote, the destiny of truths. The victimizing process also rationalizes the parental meddling of the socio-economic system, which has appointed itself as the ethical authority of human experiences. Contemporary ethics begins with the assumption that the world is a place where violence is a natural state of being, and that people must be protected against this violence along with their own capacity, perhaps even instinct, to commit evil. This is achieved either through policing or intervention, both carried out on behalf of the state. Badiou considers this an overly nihilistic interpretation of human subjectivity, and consequently takes the opposing view, that rather than good being the minimization of evil, evil is the perversion of good. It is, quote, the moment when I lack the strength to be true to the good that compels me, end quote. Nevertheless, this nihilism is coded by society as a utopian ideal, that, quote, the global spread of capitalism and what gets called democracy is the dream of all humanity, end quote. Once again, Fight Club seems to concur with Badiou's critique, observing that by systematically promising us safety from harm, the state-enforced human rights have imperceptibly enslaved us. For who would even think to attack such an obviously utopian system with its bombastic promotions of equality, self-improvement, and the pursuit of happiness? As the narrator observes, however, this pursuit is largely an advertising exercise designed to facilitate fulfillment through the act of sustained consumption of food, clothing, furniture, television, and any number of contemporary luxuries, which, as Gleam points out, ultimately serves to pacify the individual and convert his selfhood into an economic piston. Or, in the crude words of Tyler Durden, quote, self-improvement is masturbation. Now self-destruction, end quote. This is one of the guiding principles of Fight Club, that stripping yourself of worldly possessions and a socio-economic identity is actually a form of liberation, freeing yourself from the symbolic order, thus freeing you up to experience events and remain faithful to their truths, rather than accountable to the strictures of your material lifestyle. According to Johnston, quote, we must beat ourselves to obtain a freedom from, rather than within, symbolic identity, end quote. Ruptured reality is a recurring motif in Fight Club, even before the inaugural fight that serves as the narrator's event. While sitting quietly in an aeroplane seat, he daydreams of a mid-air collision and watches with bemusement as the fuselage rips open and screaming passengers are sucked into the sky. Later, a faulty pilot light completely obliterates the narrator's apartment, sending his furniture and possessions to the ground in a hail of fire and rubble. Towards the end of the film, it is revealed that the narrator himself instigated this conflagration in a dissociative state. Because of this, it is fair to assume that the narrator has been anticipating, even yearning for, a breakdown in his reality. Whether this stems from dissatisfaction with his lifestyle, a psychological illness, or a genuine desire to glimpse truth is unclear. It is probably a combination of all three. Regardless, as visually explosive as these sequences are, they do not constitute a rupture of knowledge in the conscious mind of the narrator. The event in question occurs afterwards, when he gets into a fistfight with his new friend, Tyler Durden. What is important about this fight is that it was not initiated out of anger or with the objective to dominate or hurt the other character, but as an attempt to break their reality open. After venting displeasure over their consumer-driven, material-obsessed lifestyle, the narrator and Tyler share this exchange. Tyler, I want you to hit me as hard as you can. Narrator, why? Tyler, why? I don't know why. I don't know. Never been in a fight, you? Narrator, no, but that's a good thing. Tyler, no, it is not. How much can you know about yourself if you've never been in a fight? I don't want to die without any scars. So come on, hit me before I lose my nerve. They exchange blows, urging each other on before collapsing side by side in a bloody mess. They are out of breath but visibly excited and changed by the experience. Rather than checking into a hotel or having his insurance company secure him a new apartment, the narrator returns with Tyler to an abandoned property in the factory district, and the two remain there for the remainder of the film. Something changes in the narrator after that moment, and his perception of the world shifts drastically and irreconcilably. He continues to fight with Tyler regularly outside of a bar, eventually attracting the attention and affiliation of other men. It is difficult for the narrator to verbalize just what these encounters are opening up to him, but he observes that, quote, every Saturday night we were finding something out. we were finding out more and more that we were not alone. It used to be that when I came home angry and depressed, I'd just clean my condo, polish my Scandinavian furniture. I should have been upset about my nice, neat, flaming little shit, but I wasn't." End quote. The act of fighting, the pleasure and pain of the experience, unlocks something in the narrator. It allows him and his comrades to glimpse a truth that transcends and delegitimizes the material world that they have labored under for so long. Eventually, their group grows, moving from the bar's car park to its basement. Quote, "It was right in everyone's face. Tyler and I just made it visible. It was on the tip of everyone's tongue. Tyler and I just gave it a name." End quote. The formation of the Fight Club signifies a clear subjective fidelity to the initial event and an attempt to mediate the truth discerned from that event into political discourse. Rules are formed, speeches are given, and assignments are handed out, all in dedication of mediating the truth that each man has experienced during these fights. As Badiou explains, access to that truth is entirely subjective, and it is impossible for people who are not there to fully comprehend it. Even we as the audience who bear witness to these fights cannot fully appreciate the rupture because it has been constructed and edited and filtered through film. Only the two men fighting at the center of Fight Club experience the event in pure subjectivity, while the rest of the crowd cheer them on from the sidelines, transforming the experience, but like us, being reduced to spectators. Hallwood writes that, quote, "An event has no objective or verifiable content, and its happening cannot be proved, only affirmed and proclaimed." Furthermore, quote, "Event, subject, and truth are all aspects of a single process of affirmation. Truth," quote, "comes into being through those subjects, who must remain faithful to the consequences that took place in a situation, and not because of it. Fidelity is the commitment to a truth of," quote, "being caught up in and absorbed by something that transcends all petty, private, or material concerns." End quote. One interpretation the narrator offers of the event is that, quote, "Fight Club wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about words. The hysterical shouting was in tongues, like at a Pentecostal church. Sometimes all you could hear was the flat, hard packing sounds over the yelling, or the wet choke when someone caught their breath and sprayed. You weren't alive anywhere like you were there." End quote. This description suggests a spectacle that exists outside of language and discourse, a transcendent, uplifting experience achieved through the inflicting and receiving of pain. According to Nomi, it evokes a feeling of being alive in your own skin, of asserting your subjectivity in duality against another, and in singularity against the crowd, of releasing all the thoughts and fears and complications of life, and being reduced to blood and flesh and the raw instinct to survive. The imminent and emancipatory recourse such events exposes, as Hallwood puts it, quote, "the potential for radical innovation, revolution, invention, transfiguration in every situation." End quote. The narrator uses Fight Club to finally liberate himself from his boss. He does not attack his boss, but rather attacks himself in his boss's presence, exposing the man who belongs to the ordinary realm of established identities and approved knowledge to the, quote, "exceptional realm of singular innovations and truths." End quote. Faithful to Badiou's thesis, the men of Fight Club persist in the militant proclamation of the truth to which they themselves are subjected. Accordingly, their movement gradually evolves into Project Mayhem, with members, quote, "taking Fight Club to the streets," with a series of anarchist attacks on the materialist and corporate entities that dominate their society. As subjects, they are tasked, and task themselves, with carrying out the truth. They are made immortal through the affirmation or transfiguration of a truth beyond their own moral objectivity. This sense of immortality is expressed after the death of a Project Mayhem member, with the continual chant, "His name was Robert Paulson," being recited in several of the interstate fight clubs the narrator encounters. Unfortunately, however, the truth procedures of Fight Club gradually become evil according to Badiou's ethical standards. The first dimension of evil Badiou cites is the evil of plenitude, which is the premise that the event applies only to us, that we can found our community according to this particular event and exclude others from the truth it contains. Fight Club is certainly perverted by this evil and, as Johnston observes, was arguably conceived in it, given that Fight Club at no point includes a female member and is primarily concerned with masculine ideals and anxieties. More than that, however, it also excludes the members of the upper class and figures of authority from their revolutionary objectives, and in fact positions these people as enemies of the cause, rather than targeting the power structures in which they operate. Members of Fight Club even resort to violence and threats of violence against police and corporate officials, which Badiou would also regard as an immoral application of truth procedures. The second dimension of evil is the denial of the event, which is a failure to live up to the fidelity owed to an event and a sense of betraying the truth, betraying your comrades, and betraying yourself as subject to the event. Arguably, Fight Club does not succumb to this evil. Certainly the narrator harbors doubts and grievances over the direction of the movement and its flirtations with terrorism, but he never really denies or abandons the rupture of truth he felt during his initial fight. And of course, the other members of Project Mayhem are unnervingly steadfast in their fidelity to the event. The third dimension of evil Badiou cites is to identify the truth with total power. That is, to believe it is the only thing that matters, and that it should take over everything, even knowledge outside of its original category. Fight Club absolutely transitions into this dimension of evil, and towards the end of the film, we get a glimpse of Tyler's ultimate revolutionary intent. Quote, "In the world I see, you are stalking elk through the damp canyon forest around the ruins of Rockefeller Center. You'll wear leather clothes that will last you the rest of your life. You'll climb the wrist-thick kudzu vines that wrap the Sears Tower, and when you look down, you'll see tiny figures pounding corn, laying strips of venison on the empty carpool lane of some abandoned superhighway." End quote. His vision of Project Mayhem is to transform the world back into a hunter-gatherer culture, subsisting off the ruins of civilization. To tie this vision back to Badiou's first evil, it reasserts the male patriarchy and once again forces the subjugation of women and the leveling out of wealth and real estate. However, the totalizing principle of Project Mayhem also bleeds into other categories of discourse, such as love. The narrator develops a semi-romantic relationship with a woman named Marla, who is the other participant in the support groups faking their conditions for therapeutic purposes. However, Tyler continually dismisses Marla as a distraction and an object whose only worth is sexual gratification, ultimately demanding the narrator promise never to discuss Fight Club with her. One could interpret this as Tyler's way of denying the truth procedure of love that might be developing between the narrator and Marla, and attempting to segregate it from Fight Club's political objectives. Paternal love is also referenced, with both men expressing frustrations over being abandoned by their fathers and of ultimately feeling severed from God. Determined to keep love's potential truth procedures segregated, Tyler argues, quote, "Our fathers were our models for God. If our fathers bailed, what does that tell you about God? You have to consider the possibility that God does not like you. He never wanted you. In all probability, he hates you. This is not the worst thing that can happen. We don't need him." End quote. One final example of the evil of totality is when Tyler drags a petrol station clerk into a back alley, holds a gun to his head, and threatens to kill the man if he does not re-enroll in college and follow his dreams. Tyler justifies this action by stating that he has liberated the man's pressures and concerns, but ultimately the fact that this liberation was extracted through force makes it evil according to the ethics of truth. In Fight Club's famous twist ending, it is revealed to the audience that the characters of Tyler Durden and the narrator are in fact the same person, or rather they are dissociated personalities who share the same body. The narrator, and likely the audience, is shocked to discover that he is often imagining the presence of Tyler next to him, while other times he is performing as Tyler without realizing it. Tyler's part-time occupation as a movie projectionist takes on an important metaphorical resonance that casts new light on all previous interactions. He says, quote, "It's called a changeover. The movie goes on, and nobody in the audience has any idea," end quote. Particularly relevant since Tyler is, by his own admission, a projection of the narrator's ideal masculine self. Quote, "All the ways you wish you could be, that's me. I look like you want to look, I fuck like you want to fuck, I am smart, capable, and most importantly, I am free in all the ways that you are not," end quote. This problematizes the narrator's relationship with the event in a largely unresolvable way, especially given that he is essentially split between two subjectives, with one personality constantly being repositioned as the other. Given that the film avoids detailing his psychological affliction, we can only speculate, but one thing to consider is that the event, the original fight between himself and Tyler, was actually generated narrator alone. Given that his psyche did not comprehend that Tyler was an imaginary person, this fact does not mean the event was devoid of truth. It was still true for the narrator, just as it was true for the hundreds of other Fight Club members who did not have dissociative personality disorders. However, it does alter the conception of this event. Whatever truth the narrator experienced during the event was derived from his psychological machinations. This may suggest an area of truth procedures that Badiou had not even considered. It may even suggest that a person suffering from a mental disorder has a less filtered access to truth, because they are not necessarily assimilated into knowledge systems the way other people. As I said, however, given how little medical information the film provides us with, it is difficult to elaborate further. Returning to the overarching narrative, however, it is fair to say that Fight Club is a nihilistic film. The militant activists of Fight Club's truths are gradually subjugated by their charismatic leader and transformed back into the robotic slaves they had functioned as for years in the capitalist machine. Now they are called space monkeys, quote, ready to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Their revolutionary movement, even if it remains utterly faithful and devoted to its original event and the truth therein, succumbs to the evil of plenitude, totality, and force. Ultimately, the film submits that human subjects are more inclined towards the methods of evil and servitude than Badiou's optimistic treatise gave them credit for.